So thanks for joining us, everybody. As I said before, my name is Lee, and it's my pleasure to welcome our two panelists today. Terry, the founder of BigRoad, and Rick, a longtime veteran of safety and compliance. So we'll start with a little bit of background on these guys. Terry was, as I said, one of the co-founders of BigRoad. He's been a long-time software professional, 27 years in the industry. Most of the software that he has produced has been focused on value, ease of use, broad adoption, that sort of thing. The background of Terry in the industry is fairly extensive. He's been a long-time speaker, and he's been a panelist on many discussions, so we're happy to have him join us today. We also have Rick Gobbell with us. He's a veteran of the US DOT. He's highly qualified when it comes to safety and compliance. He's been doing this sort of thing for years, and it's really a pleasure to have him here with us as well, because when it comes to Motorcoach, he's truly an expert when it comes to safety and compliance, and does everything you need from drug and alcohol testing to advising you on your safety and compliance needs and driver logs, to the whole gamut of safety and compliance services. So thanks a lot, Rick, for joining us today. All right, so we're just going to give you a little bit of an amusing image to get started with here. So this is a picture of Rick back when he started with the DOT, if you can imagine. So you can see a nice classic vehicle there behind him, and it's really great to have someone here who's seen the industry change over the years and has really got a great familiarity with what has become the standard today. And we're going to exploit that knowledge of his through our agenda today. We're going to start with Rick giving us a bit of an overview of where the regulations stand right now, and he's going to help us understand what some of the common issues with driver logs really are. And then we're going to go through a few more of the broad industry issues that are really plaguing people today, what your options are for driver logs, the new ELD or electronic logging device mandate, and what it means to be, what it will mean to be compliant in the next couple of years. We're going to talk a little bit about driver technology and in-cab technology and how that's changed, and then we'll take your questions. So we'll pass it over to Terry here, and he can get started giving you a little bit of an overview of who BigRoad is and what we've done to date.
Great, thanks, Lee. Just verify that I can be heard right now. Lee, I'm on. I think I heard the unmute button go. So we're not in the same offices today. In actual fact, we're using technology that has speakers from kind of all over the place in terms of the numbers of states and provinces of Canada. So kind of fun that we can be able to do this today. What I'd like to start with is just a brief overview of who BigRoad is. I think most people on this call have heard of us by now. We started BigRoad as an idea back in 2011 and established it as a company in 2012. Really as a focus of how do we take a lot of the complexity of the compliance complexities out of driving a commercial vehicle. When we looked at the amount of paper and processes that were in place for a commercial vehicle driver, it was daunting. It still is daunting, and we thought, in this age, can we, if a few things happen in the industry, simplify that complexity using something as simple as a smartphone or a tablet? And a whole bunch of things had to happen for that to make sense, like cost and quality of networks and robustness of technology and all of those things. And the good news is in 2012 we placed a bet that cell phone technology would have enough power to run this type of software, and it does. Basically, the smartphone in the cab of a vehicle is equivalent to what we would call a supercomputer back in the early 2000s or late 1990s. Then if we take a look at robustness of the network is how well are the carrier networks, the cell, the terrestrial networks, able to handle this type of data flow from quality, and that's got just incredibly better over the past 3 years. And then lastly, can the costs come in line so that this type of solution be affordable to the masses? And that's the bet that we placed. So we set out to make a fleet management type of application, really focusing on the bigger group of people, which is small fleet. And this is really where I think Motorcoach as well, is there's not many very huge fleets out there, but there's many fleets, operating fleets of motor coaches in the 5, 10, 50, 80, in that category, and that's what we call the small to medium business area for fleets. So that's what we've really focused on. Since launching in 2012, we've had the pleasure of becoming very important to the driver community. We wanted to make sure that the applications that were produced were very applicable and fit the driver's needs, and that driver's needs for simplicity. And so we created, started with an Android application and quickly became the #1 coach-based application on Android. And then we're asked very quickly to produce an application for Apple. So we produced an Apple iOS application after that, and again grew to the #1 category. Today, combined fleets, those being truck as well as motor coach, we're working with more than 4,000 fleets today, and have the pleasure of being the industry-acclaimed electronic driver log. We spend a lot of time and a lot of attention listening to what the drivers are saying, and so on the left-hand side of the screen, you see a review category, and we listen to that. We have our team looking at it all the time to make sure that the drivers are getting value out of the BigRoad application, and we've steadily maintained a 4.6 or greater star rating from the driver community. This isn't the fleet community, but the driver community, so we're really pleased with that as well.
All right, thanks a lot, Terry. Now we'll move on to a little bit more of the regulatory climate. So, Rick, I'm going to ask you now to join us and speak a little bit more about regulating motor coaches.
A couple of things on the motor coach industry, as well as the trucking industry, relating to electronic logging devices. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration fully intends to put out a rule this year requiring some sort of ELD technology on every commercial motor vehicle. That's their plan. If they get it done, and I think they'll have a pretty good stab at it before the end of the year, I think we'll see something relating to ELDs this year. Now, the FMCSA has made motor coach operators a priority item for their intervention and enforcement action for the last 5 or 6 years. Every motor coach operator now is required to go through a full compliance review and be rated every 2 years. They get generally, most people get by with 2, and they get into the 3rd year before they audit you again. But you're on average, they're being audited. Every motor coach operation is being audited by the US DOT every 25, 26, 27 months. They've implemented what they call enhanced investigative techniques when they're doing the compliance reviews on the motor coach operators, and they spend an enormous amount of time now at our motor coach operators conducting these compliance reviews and conducting as many vehicle inspections as they possibly can during their compliance reviews. This is in addition to roadside inspections. They study the crashes a whole lot deeper. They interview a whole lot more people in our companies, and they have almost a zero tolerance for violation. And some of the terms some of them have used is broken window policing. And broken window policing means every violation of any regulation is a serious offense. Corrective action must be taken, and if you can reduce the small violations, then the large violations, the more serious violations, will reduce automatically. I'm working on one now. I'm actually not through with it. A motor coach operator where they spent about 4 weeks conducting compliance reviews, inspected 12 or 13 of his motor coaches, give them a satisfactory safety rating, and 2 months later we get an $11,000 fine letter in the mail. Just got through responding to it. We'll deal with that issue on down the road. But we got a SAT rating, $11,000 fine, and I think that's a real good example of broken window enforcement and their enhanced investigative techniques. So if they do a compliance review on you, expect them to call in your staff, your employees. They're getting the cell phone numbers of all your drivers. They're calling your drivers. They're asking questions about what you do, how do you do it, what do you not do, things of that nature. So I'm telling you, these are very serious compliance reviews. They can affect your company. They can actually put your company out of business. So we backed them off a little bit lately on putting carriers out of business. Their next initiative is going to be putting drivers out of service. They're in the process now of writing rules to declare a driver an imminent hazard and remove that driver from the highway. And this is the federal government doing this now. Also, they're writing rules relating to the safety rating methodology, safety fitness determination, which we expect out in the fall, whereas they can use roadside inspection and where they can use crash data to issue safety ratings on us as motor carriers. Now, where that'll go, I don't know. The other thing about motor coach operators that we need to keep in mind, I do a lot of work for motor coach operators. I serve the Tennessee Motor Coach Association as their consultant. I've been there all week at their convention. Keep in mind that we are targets of their intervention and that they want to show Congress is mandated, they do these audits, they want to show Congress that they're finding serious violations of the regulations, that they're taking intervention action, and that they're doing everything in their power to reduce violations, which in their mind will reduce crashes. So that's kind of where we are right now. It's not going to get better in the near future that I see. It's going to get harder on us as motor coach operators to comply. I told the group this week, I said, because one of them was asking, why are they trying to fine us for every little thing we find now? And I said, well, it's like a trooper that they tell to go out and write 30 speeding violations a month. He goes out and he writes 30 speeding violations, not a problem. 6 months down the road, people have learned that he's out there writing tickets every day. He's having a hard time now of writing tickets, and his standards being 10-mile-an-hour speed limit. So he reduces his threshold or his tolerance down to 5 miles an hour. And he writes 30 tickets because that's exactly what he thinks they want him to do. That goes along for another 3 or 4 months. Now it's really getting hard to write tickets, really getting hard. So he's got to change his tolerance again. Now we're down to 1 or 2 mile an hour of speed limit. And that's a pretty good analysis right now of where FMCSA is relating to motor coach operators. So again, let me say, I see it's going to get more stringent. There'll be more stringent in the near future, and we'll continue to have to deal with this for some time now.
All right, thanks a lot, Rick. That's a good overview, and definitely it mirrors some of what we've heard from our customers out there as well, that things are getting a little bit tighter, especially in the motor coach industry. So I'd ask you now if you can perhaps just do a very quick overview of what the rules are and sort of what the letter of the law is, and then we can talk a little bit more about what particular problems the drivers out there are having with their logs because of these rules.
The hours of service regulation on passenger carriers are the same regulations that we've had in our industry for the last 30 or 40 years. So when the new hours of service regulations were written for motor property carrier operators, where now they can drive more than they used to be able to drive an hour more, and they have to take 2 hours more rest, and we're into the 34-hour restart, we're in the 15-minute break, we're into so many different things now with the property carrier rule. That is not the case for the passenger carrier operators. We're still operating under the same rule. We can drive 10 hours, at which time we've got to take an 8-hour break. We can work and drive up to 15 hours, which includes both working and driving time, and then their off-duty time does not count toward our 15-hour rule. So you'll hear people talking about the 14-hour rule. That does not apply to our industry. the 70-hour rule, the 70-hour and an 8-day, or 60 hours and 7-day rule. That still applies to us. We don't have a restart. We don't get a restart. But again, you know, like only our driving and on-duty time counts toward that. So those rules haven't changed. They're the same. They've been now for a long, long time. There is one difference. The agency back in July, and I want to say July of 2013, issued a new guidance for off-duty time in our industry, as well as motor care. And we can now spend time resting in a motor coach and log that time as off-duty time. Prior to that, we couldn't do that. Now, we cannot log that time in a motor coach if it's moving as off-duty. That is on-duty, not driving time, unless we have a sleeper berth, or a sleeper berth meets the requirements of the Regulation 39376. Unless we get to where we're going, we get 8 hours off duty before we start driving, then we can log that on duty, that travel time as off duty time. So that's been a little bit of an issue in our industry for a long time about the travel time. So that rule's still in there. Not a lot has changed in our industry relating to the hours of service rule. So we hadn't had any major changes to us. Now the other side of that coin is the agency would like to take the truckers' rules and apply them to us. One of the problems they have is when you start talking about different types of hours of service regulations for different types of entities, then the entity steps up and says, look, if they can do it, why can't we do it? So we are hearing that a lot, and the motor carriers would like for the passenger carriers be subject to the same rules they are. So I think we'll have that battle to deal with before too long. There are some limited exceptions, so we're not going to deal with too many of them. And I think as this pops up here, every driver must prepare a record of duty status, and it must be current to the last change of duty status. And the drivers are required at an inspection point to have their most current that day's log in their prior 7 days. If a driver doesn't have that day or the prior 7 days log, they'll put the driver out of service for not having that with them. Or if a driver's over his hours, they put him out of service. If the driver's log, they can determine the log's inaccurate, they put him out of service. So there's several ways they put us out of service at roadside inspections. I think there's 12 or 13 states now that are requiring motor coaches to enter inspection sites. We complained about that. We're not getting a lot of traction with it. But that is going on out there, so we're getting more inspections, roadside inspections, because some of these states do require us to come in the inspection points now. Here's an example, a pretty simple log. Driver drove 7.75 hours. Driver worked 11.5. That'd be a 12.25 day. So you can see he's probably okay on that. Here's the data elements that we're required to have on a log. The date, the company he's driving for, the number of miles. We see a lot of write-ups on logbooks that don't have all this information in it. The grid that we look at down in the middle, the unit number, the trailer number. If we have a trailer behind us, probably doesn't apply much to us. Point of change of duty status, where you went from one line to the next line, one of the 4 lines, and shipping information. The most common write-ups on the side of the road relating to hours of service is the driver's log is not properly prepared. Just a simple paperwork violation. About 80% of our roadside inspections, of the violation they find, it's this violation right here. Drivers got to know to put shipping information on there. If you don't have a charter order number or some other number that it relate back to the trip, you simply write passengers and who you're transporting the passengers for. First Baptist Church of Whitesville, Virginia, whoever it may be. So that's the requirements that's got to go on a record of duty status.
What would you say are the most common sort of form and manner errors other than the shipping number? Is it things like missing signature or adding up the hours wrong? What do you see most often?
The most common one is the shipping information. I don't see a lot of the others. Shipping information missing. Driver behind on his log. He's further behind his last change of duty status, and the driver not possessing the last 7 days logs. That's the most common violations we see, and we see
something like not current, where you haven't drawn the line up to the last duty status change. That kind of thing is fairly common as well, I guess.
Yes, and use this log here as an example. Let's say the driver had been in Cherry Hill, North Carolina. That was his last change of duty status. He gets in his bus. He drives 1 hour to 7 p.m. He gets inspected at 7 p.m. He didn't log that 1 hour from 5:45 to 7. Let's see, 5:45 to 7 p.m. That would be the not current log, and that is written up every day on our drivers out there.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that overview, Rick, and I'm sure we're going to get lots of good questions as well from everything you talked about there. So I'll pass it over now to Terry to talk a little bit about the industry and what seem to be the most pressing issues right now.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Rick. It's always great to share the stage with you, because you know so much about this area. So it's a pleasure, and like I say, I'm sure you'll get a lot of additional questions as we're going along here. Let's just talk about this industry, the hours of service industry, if you want to call it, the transportation industry, and then hours of service as a requirement. So in the United States, and we include Canada into that as well, so North America, excluding Mexico, there's 4 to 5 million long-haul trucks and buses that are required to do hours of service logs. So when the new rules come in place, the new electronic logging device rules that Rick alluded to earlier, there's another, we're guessing, the industry's guessing 4 million vehicles that have to do some sort of type of electronic logs based upon their part-time requirements to do it as well. So today, there's 4 to 5 million vehicles, drivers that have to do hours of service recording for compliance. 80% of them are still using paper logbooks today. That actually makes this paper-producing industry the second largest after tax paperwork in the United States. So it's an incredible, daunting amount of paper that gets processed on a daily basis and then stored for the required periods of time. That means there's 1 billion paper logs submitted and filed every year. And if you take a look at paperwork savings, there's huge amounts of savings that the industry can take advantage in. We estimate in the 1.7 billion. And then on the part-time side, there's, again, 4+ million. Again, a good example of that would be, a big pickup truck pulling just an oversized trailer, or a van who's just over his passenger limit as an example. Okay. Well, am I controlling the slides here? Awesome. Let me do that. Oops. Oh, I did it too far. Okay. So top industry issues. So this is the latest studies, and we participate and read as many of this information that we can find of this type of information. And this one is very relevant. And so how can I stay compliant, keep my drivers happy, and produce and still make money in my business? And with these top 5 industry issues, our number one in order is hours of service right now from a business standpoint. Is how do I maintain and stay on top of this ever changing and scrutinized requirement to be a fleet operator, and that is my hours of service. Number 2 is, where do I find my drivers? There's continually a shortage of the drivers, and in the coach space, obviously a large part-time requirement for that. CSA scores, and Rick, maybe at some point we'll talk more about CSA score management in the coach industry. I'm sure that question will come up. Driver retention, so driver shortage and how to keep my drivers. And then the big question, which we're here to help you answer today as well, is this thing called ELD. What does it mean to the motor coach industry? And we'll talk about all of that in a lot of detail. Hours of service, CSA score management in this. We think that if you put the right programs and policies in place, your retention levels could go up and make it easier for your drivers. And then the driver shortage piece is, we're finding a lot of companies that are using current type technologies versus paper technology to actually help them recruit drivers as well. So we'll talk more about that as we go along. Okay. Okay, so let's at this point do a review of the options for how you manage hours of service. There are today, and Rick, if I say anything that you want to jump in on, please do, but there's 3 ways that companies, operators can actually manage their hours of service today. So their driver log today can be handled by paper. Their driver log can be handled by electronic logbooks, and that's a software application running on a device in the cab of the vehicle, like a smartphone or a tablet. And then there's the other option, the third option, I should say, which is being engine connected. And these all are legal methods for how you produce, maintain, and share your hours of service recordings with law enforcement. So I'm going to just talk about each one of these separately and address how this is accomplished today. So from a paper standpoint, Rick pulled up a graph earlier. Just sharing this again, a driver creates a log on a paper graph, pencil and ruler. He collects all of his supporting documents during the trip to support that log. He keeps all the previous 7 days of logs, plus the current day, available for any inspection situation. The logs are handed in back when he gets to the office. If the driver's away for many, many days, a lot of companies would prefer him to ship back that supporting paperwork in a trip pack or fax. The fleet then audits the logs or has a firm audit those logs, and that's paper and audit. And then basically reprimands come in as violations are discovered, usually days later, weeks later. And these are based upon the audit results from the third-party firm and or the fleet itself. All of these logs are required to be stored for 6 months plus the current month for the time when you're being audited by the federal government. So looking at the pros of this type of scenario is, as we all know, the driver has the ability in paper, while being true and factual, to change those logs. So if there's a mistake, a typo, he has an eraser on his pencil, he can adjust or edit those logs. The other pro of staying with this approach, which is the majority of fleets and drivers in the industry, is there's no change. There's no processes to change in your business. It may not be the most effective, but it would be, to put change in place is sometimes difficult. So those are the key things around that. The difficulties that we come into are, which we'll call the cons here, is that you can be waiting 1 to 6 weeks for information, and when I say information, based upon having the logs audited and put into a report format, so you can look at it and understand where you are from a violation standpoint at a driver level and at a company level. Form and manner violations, you have no control of. In this example, you're hoping that you've trained your drivers well enough and that they're doing their clerical work very well, because that's really what we're talking about here, is missing an I or crossing a T or entering a number wrong, etc. What you're also not getting in this example is a real-time view of your current liability. So what is the risk right now of me getting violations of all the vehicles that are on the road? And lastly is, I've got all these logs stored, they're in my filing cabinets. Now what if I get audited? They're going to uncover the bad drivers or the drivers where there's violations, and what's my risk associated with that? What I want to do next is just cover electronic logs, the second option I pointed out. So in an electronic logbook world, what we're talking about is software running on a smartphone or tablet. All the logs are automatically created using mobile technology. The driver captures, as we said before, supporting documents during the trip. Now he can keep those paper documents or scan those into the applications as well that he's chosen to use or you have chosen to use. The application stores all of the 7 days of logs plus the current day for inspection purposes. And this is totally legal to do as well. Logs are audited and visible to the fleet in real time. So everything that's happening in the vehicle for that driver, with the driver, whether he's in the vehicle or out, everything is visible and audited, so you have an availability of that information in real time. The dashboard views of this type of technology is available, showing all potential violations or risks of violations in every vehicle with every driver. This provides an opportunity for real-time coaching with those drivers. And log storage is automatic, in this types of applications. So you have 6 months plus the current month available when required, and then you make a decision if you would like to keep those logs for longer than that 6-month period. So the pros of this type of technology is the driver can edit his logs, so he still has the virtual eraser available where he can make those same adjustments as he previously was on paper logs. The other pros, you have real-time status, so you're basically going into a no-risk state, so that you know what's going on. So because of the real-time, so if there's any violations, you can deal with it through the alert mechanisms. No form and manner issues. So what we and other companies that provide this type of technology do is make sure that if there can't be a form and manner issue. If there is anything that pops up, the driver's notified of it, the fleet is notified of it, the safety person is notified of it, so the drivers in real time can be managed or manage themselves into no form and manner issues. Real-time status, up to the minute. Where's my driver, up to the minute. And the ability to capture those important documents or damage or et cetera, using the camera capabilities for scanning on these devices as well. So let's just look at what the cons are. When you look at the cons of this type of technology in vehicle, really it's process change. And for those on the call or those who've tried this type of technology, you can see that most times the driver community will say, wow, this is going to be really hard. I don't even know how to use a computer. How am I going to use this type of technology? So the process change is the biggest deal here that we see in electronic logbook. I'm going to move to the third application, and that's engine connected. Now, in an engine connected, there's actually a device connected to the bus of the motor coach, the engine bus of the bus. That sounds funny. And so that's connected, and it talks Bluetooth or wired to a device like a smartphone, tablet, or a proprietary device. All the logs are automatically created using mobile technology and combined engine data. Driver captures is the same thing, captures all the supporting documents during the trip. The applications store 7 days logs plus the current day for inspection purposes. All logs are audited and visible to the fleet in real time. There's a dashboard view of any potential violations. So if your driver is driving out of spec, then you'll know that. Providing the real-time coaching opportunity. And again, all of your logs are stored for 6 months plus that current month and available if required through an audit process. So let's take a look at here what are the pros of this type of technology. Real-time status, no risk. No form and manner issues. Where's my driver? Document capture, ELD. So very specific and almost exactly the same as electronic logs, except when we go to the cons, the driver cannot edit logs. And many on the call would say, well, that's a good thing. And we agree that if that's the way you want to run your business without a driver editable log, then this is the approach that we recommend. For those that have drivers that are editing their logs or assigning to be factual and true, then you can still stay with electronic logs, or you can have a hybrid approach in that model where some are engine connected and some are not engine connected, but your back-end dashboard views are the same. The other con here is process change, just like electronic logs is process change. Those are your three options. We've tried to lay it out in the most logical way that we can, and we'll be providing this information for you to look at again in your own time. Let's take a look now at electronic logging devices. So we're all hearing about it. We just attended last week the UMA, the Motorcoach Association show down in New Orleans, where there was many hundreds of motor coach companies there attending and listening to what's going on. And this was very topical at this show because it's going to happen. We believe it is going to happen. The government in the United States, federal government, is going to put some sort of electronic logging device mandate in place. So looking at what it means is what I'm going to talk about next. ELD proposed specification means a connected vehicle solution, which records vehicle operation and movement and is tamper resistant. Creates a record of duty status, when and where the driver was driving, and inspectable at roadside. Auditable. All logs and edits, changes, adjustments to the logs must be auditable, and a full record is on the server of any changes to those logs. It needs to have a comprehensive audit capable for authorities. Now, all of this really comes into a electronic logging comparison view. So what I've just brought up onto the screen here is from an ELD ebook, and if you're interested in the ebook, please ask for it. We'll make sure that this gets sent to you with all of this information. But today, what you're seeing is that you have what's called a paper, electronic logs, AOBRD, EOBR. Everything is going to go to a single solution called ELD, electronic logging device. And this puts it into a grid for you so that you can actually very simply see what does ELD mean and where do I fit into this example. I do recommend requesting the ELD ebook. It does lay it out very nicely for you in terms of where you need to be going to remain compliant as the industry moves to ELD. So timeline for compliance, and this is based on the latest FMCSA proposal. We're still seeing a very strong commitment from the FMCSA to publish the final ELD specification by September 30th, 2015. It is their fourth quarter. They are committing themselves to making this happen in 2015, their fiscal 2015. ELDs will be permitted but not mandated immediately. So you could start going to ELD. If you're currently, so by 2017, so if you make the commitment, so the mandate comes in September 30th, 2015, and you're a paper log user, you will be required to move to an ELD within 24 months, by September 30th, 2017. If you're currently using the AOBRD, the only current version of an engine connected model, which is AOBRD 395.15 compliant solution, you will have an additional 2 years. Let's call it a grandfather clause that will let you run that until 2019 before you need to be ELD requirement, giving your provider an additional 2 years to move you, or you to additional 2 years to move to what's an ELD specification. It's written this way because the final ELD specification is yet to be published. Again, expectation is by September 30th, 2015 as a mandate. Rick, is Rick unmuted? He may want to add something to this point right here.
Now, I think that's pretty clear. The agency has continued to put these dates out, and like you said, they don't seem to be backing up on it at all. So I fully expect them to do everything they can to make these dates work.
Yeah, and it puts one consistent platform across trucking and motor coach, right?
Say again, I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Rick. I said it all basically puts one consistent technology platform or specification in all types of commercial drivers.
I've seen nothing to indicate any different technologies for different types of operations in our industry. Everything so far I've haven't even heard no discussion that there'll be different technologies for different type of motor carrier operations.
Right, that's consistent. Okay, let's move to driver technology, and we're getting closer to the end, and we have a special guest to talk a little bit about their implementation. So let's just talk about driver technology. The exciting thing that's happened over the past 3 years is that this idea of drivers are already having these types of devices in their hand when they get into the coach. Is it possible to use that? That's called bring your own device. So today, drivers with mobile devices today in a commercial vehicle is moved from 35% in 2012 when the flip phone was still prevalent to more than 80%. That number's a little low in 2014. So in 2015, we see that pushing up to 90%. It's pretty difficult to purchase the flip phone technology that we so loved back only a few years ago. So the good news is we're seeing a very large adoption of smartphone devices, and that means we're starting to see a lot of this type of technology being downloaded by the driver. Some examples I thought I'd bring up here: Diamond Coach, based out of Whites Creek, Tennessee, currently 78 users, and we're going to have Sarah Beth speak in a moment on this. And then Roadrunner, and very unique industry with very unique challenges. I had the pleasure of sitting with Sarah Beth talking about it, and so I think we were really pleased that we were able to provide a solution in there. Roadrunner Charters, one of our very early Motorcoach customers, running 56 users in Irving, Texas, and same sort of thing, wanted to get a fleet management application, but that was also dealing with all of the regulatory compliance pieces around hours of service logs as well. Taking a look at what it looks like in a cab of a vehicle. Some of our drivers might be using it already. it's basically just try it is always been our motto in this example. Everything from bring your own device to solutions from a company called NextLink that can put in a whole tablet-based solution like you're looking at in this picture, and then applications clearly are easier than paper because we're getting the computer to manage this. And I'm going to let Sarah Beth talk in one moment, but I just want to say the nice part of this is, oh, I'm waiting for one slide to click here and it won't click. Oh, my computer might have hung here, Lee. So,
okay, no problem.
That's good timing for this, actually. So I was basically going to say one thing that we look at in this technology is that there is an app for that, and that was really kind of a play on the industry evolution of applications, and that's where BigRoad fits into this type of technology. And
sure, and maybe we can have Sarah Beth chime in now a little bit more while we're talking about technology and drivers using the app. I know that she personally was involved in her fleet at getting the app rolled out to her drivers. So Sarah Beth, are you there?
I am.
Great, thanks for joining us today. Maybe just give us a brief overview. What's your role at Diamond Coach, and what does Diamond Coach do?
Sure. I am the safety director at Diamond Coach, and we are an entertainer tour bus company based out of Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay, great. So would you say that safety is pretty important to your clients?
Safety is especially important to our clients and to us, especially with high-profile clients. You've always got people looking at you from every side.
Right, yeah, okay, cool. So you've been with us for a little while now. Can you give us a little background about how you got the app out to your drivers and what their response was?
Sure. At first, they were very hesitant to accept that this is 2014 at the time, and they had to come with us and join us in the technology world. But after a trial period, many of them now will say that it's the best thing that's happened to their industry in a while, especially the guys that were going old school paper logs. And then we had some guys that were doing some type of electronic logging, but just not BigRoad. So it was a big transition for them, but the biggest advice I can give to anyone who knows that their drivers are going to be hesitant is educate yourself first. Know what BigRoad looks like on an iPad, what it looks like on an iPhone, what it looks like on Android. Memorize it, have it down, and it won't take you that long. It's so easy. I can walk somebody through fixing something while I'm at the grocery store.
That's great. Do you get a lot of calls at the grocery store?
I have the lovely double-edged sword of a company phone, so there were evenings and weekend calls from drivers that were anxious and excited because they wanted to do it correctly.
Right.
And I don't mind taking those calls, and now that we've been doing it for about 11 months, I don't have very many of those calls at all.
Okay, super. Have you had any driver turnover or anyone leave because they were forced to use electronic logs?
I lost one driver because he was forced to use electronic logging, but I think that it just spoke volumes about the kind of driver that he is, and he was a better suited somewhere else anyway.
Right. Yeah. That's what we hear often from other people as well. Is that if you have a lot of pushback from drivers, then it's good to scrutinize what they're doing because they might be a bigger liability to you than they're worth. So.
Yeah. We also had 2 drivers that were still using their flip phones, and so this was a good excuse for them or a good reason to push them into the smartphones, and now they're very, very excited, and they love to send pictures of random things.
Great. That's great. Well, thanks a lot for speaking with us, Sarah Beth.
Anytime.
All right. We're just going to go over a brief overview of what BigRoad does differently from our competition as a last sort of thing to leave you with. So the big thing is that we're really focused on safety and compliance, and that's our #1 priority in our app. And we really believe that improvements start at the driver, and the way that the app is designed and the way that the fleet management system is designed is it takes the burden off of the back office as much as possible and allows the driver to fix the problems that they need to fix. In the process, we've been working with drivers closely, and we make sure that this is an app that they actually want to use and that they're excited to use because it makes their life easier. And the last thing to talk about is that it's very easy to get started with BigRoad, and it's very cost effective. And we don't have a contract, so you can try it out, and if it doesn't work out for you, we don't hold you to anything, because we really want to make sure that you're sticking with us because we're well suited to you and that our customer service is great, not because you have a contract that you have to fulfill. So, so now we'll take some questions from the audience. So I think one thing that a lot of people ask is a little bit more about CSA and what is the recourse if you have a violation and you don't think that it's justified. If you get a ticket, a fine, or an out of service, what can you do to fight that? Rick, maybe you can take that one.
So if you get a ticket, you're talking about, you broke up a little bit on me. Say it again.
What I was saying is if you get a ticket or you have a fine or some sort of write-up, what do you do about that? What's your recourse?
Well, of course, it would depend on what the write-up is. A roadside inspection, if it results in a citation, you know, you've got court dates and things, proceedings to follow, and we always encourage our companies and our drivers to try to go back to court. Don't just pay the citation necessarily. Let's take a look at it and see whether or not it would be worth the trip back to court. Compliance reviews by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration or state agencies a whole nother ball game. A big part of them result in notice of claims where the agency or the state agency documents and sends to the federal government, and some of the states are doing it on their own now. Texas, Ohio, there's several states that have got their own enforcement programs for violations they find in motor carrier operations. But, of course, everything has a due process. I do a lot of filing of responses to notice of claims. I do data queues on roadside inspections. Anybody can do them. I'm probably not any better than anybody else. But data queues, we file them a lot. You file your data queues if you don't believe the violation occurred. If you go back to court, we have the adjudicated citation rules now. So if you do win in court, the state agency should remove the violation from CSA. I started to mention a minute ago on CSA, and I got a little distracted. What most people don't understand about CSA is it measures motor carriers on a percentile ranking. Percentile ranking is a fancy term for bell curve. They can only measure about 20% of the truck and the motor coach operators out there now to give them a score. And then out of the ones they can measure, they put them in groups, and then we percentile rank them or bell curve them. And 35% always fails. 65% passes, 35% fails in any basic of CSA. Now they're talking about taking, right now we're in the peer groups with truckers. They're talking about pulling us out of those peer groups and putting us in our own peer group. If we go into our own peer group, 35% of us will always fail every month, no matter how good we are. So keep that in mind as we progress down the road. Certainly it's important to challenge violations that you do not believe were properly cited, and certainly I believe you ought to challenge every penalty, every rating. At least look at it and see if we have some grounds to challenge them. And I mentioned one I've been working on this week and last week. The investigator actually made some mistakes in the audit, and so far we've gotten $8,800 taken out of the penalty, and we're still looking at $4,960 on one count. And we've asked for binding arbitration, and we generally settle binding arbitrations for anywhere from 40% off to sometimes we have some real good results, but generally around 40%. So anytime you're faced that the government decides they want to do something to you, you do have due process rights, and talk to someone or handle it yourself. But I strongly encourage people, don't just roll over, because the second offense carries maximum penalties. So if you just pay the first one, they come out there in 2 years and find something else, then you'll be paying maximum penalty with no mitigations. So it is important to challenge these things. It's important to challenge roadside inspections and citations because that's what affects your CSA scores.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Rick. So we've got a whole bunch of questions.
Ask a question there, Lee, with Rick. One quick one. If you're using electronic versus paper, Rick, is it better, easier? Just kind of an open question with a quick answer, but you find the audits and reviews and the defensibility is better with electronic?
Well, one thing we mitigate some notice of claims with is that we are willing to go to some sort of electronic logging device to show that we are trying to comply. But a big part of the violations I see, and I think there's two violations that FMCSA fines and penalizes motor carriers routinely on, is drug and alcohol testing and false logs. I see very few penalties on hours of service violations. It's false logs. Now, I always tell my clients, look back there on Friday afternoon in the break room. If you see a driver back there tearing out pages and rewriting pages and he's trying to remember where he was last Tuesday at a certain time, these guys are making out false logs. And in FMCSA's eyes, any log that does not match a supporting document within 1 hour or 50 miles is considered a false log. In their mind, they consider a false log as to conceal an hours of service violation. And that's just not the case. We just don't have that many drivers out there running over the hours. Not to say we don't have some. We certainly do. And, drivers will run at their convenience sometimes over their hours. But the good thing about electronic logging devices is we eliminate the vast majority of the false log citations, and then we're able to deal with what the real issue is, and that is, are we scheduling runs that our drivers can't make within the hours of service regulations? Are we allowing drivers to work their own schedule to suit themselves rather than schedules that comply with the hours of service regulations? That is, do we allow drivers to leave anytime they want to on Sunday afternoon? Now, I know with motor coach operators, it's quite a bit different. We control it real well through scheduling, but with people like Sarah Beth there, their call on demand, they run long distances. We got to make sure that, and we do make sure, the vast majority of us make sure that we schedule runs a driver can make. Now, on our trucking side, if a driver leaves at 7 o'clock on Sunday night rather than at noon on Sunday, that creates us a problem. Now, they all come back. I hear this everywhere I go, every time. Well, what if I'm 50 miles from home? What am I supposed to do? What if I'm 100 miles from home on Friday afternoon? Am I supposed to sit down here for 8 hours or 10 hours under trucking rules and not be able to go home? Well, what are we going to say? I hope that we can schedule the run so we don't end up in those positions. But again, those are not everyday issues. They're sporadic issues. The agency allows us basically to violate each of the hours of service regulations 9% of the time before it affects our rating or before we're penalized. So I think sometimes we step over a dollar to pick up a dime when we're worrying about staying with paper logs. We end up in trouble with paper logs, and we may not have near the problem with our service compliance we think we do.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Rick. One question that's come up a few times about e-logs is if you can't edit and you don't have proper cell phone coverage, what do you do? So maybe, Terry, you can field that one.
Actually, the way technology is built today, at least at the BigRoad level, is there's two types of antennas in our devices. You have a satellite GPS signal antenna, and that's actually picking up satellite. And so even if you're out of cell coverage, you're still tracking where the vehicle was, recording that information for accuracy. And if you're out of cell coverage for a period of time, that just resynchronizes, so that you're actually not getting any missing data at all. That's a key component of the technology design, again, at least in the BigRoad application, so that problem doesn't occur.
Okay, sounds good. So basically, even if you don't have cell coverage, you'll still get GPS, and then when you do eventually have cell coverage, everything will just get synchronized automatically, and it's like you never lost it in the first place?
Absolutely, and and for those that have built a robust technology, I mean, the whole industry is basically moved to terrestrial, so that's the same for all types of this type of application.
Okay. What about with ELD? You know, on occasion we have situations where GPS is not available. Say you're in the city and you're surrounded by big buildings, you just can't get a fix. What'll happen if you can't actually get a GPS signal when you, say, for example, make a duty status change and need to record a location?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's still the ability to make an edit to your logs as a driver, and that would be a recorded edit on your log. And so the driver still will have, in the ELD mandate or rules, the driver is still responsible for true and factual logs. And that problem is possible. It's very possible. And the driver has the ability to include that information if it is missing. If it's defective, the device goes defective, then the driver will be notified of that situation, and he will be required by the mandate to move to paper until that remedy can be happening to his device.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. All right, so I think we're approaching the end of our time here. We still have lots of questions to answer, unfortunately, but what we'll try to do is we'll try to get all those answers posted up on our blog, and we'll send everyone out an email after that's done so that you can see those answers posted up there. And of course, you're always welcome to get in touch with us by phone as well, and have someone from our support or sales team talk to you about any concerns you might have there. So I want to say thanks again to Terry, to Rick, and to Sarah Beth for their comments today and for joining us. I hope everyone got what they were looking for out of the webinar, and it was nice to have you all along. Thanks a lot.